Right. Hello, everyone. If you're watching this, the stream just took a little while to upload. I'm still working how to drive YouTube Live. Now, I'm sorry also that I didn't get started at 7:15, like I said I was going to. In true libertarian fashion, it's actually V-Line's fault. And in a more accurate true libertarian fashion, it's the fault of whoever jumped in front of a V-Line train to delay trains getting back from Southern Cross. So there were some pretty significant delays. Regrettably, someone decided that they didn't want to continue living in Victoria, which is obviously very sad. But that was why I got home late. In a more positive sense, though, if we can find silver linings in a tragedy, I bumped into a fellow Libertarian Party member while I was waiting for a replacement bus at Deer Park, which was pretty funny. Definitely bad for my incognito staying off the radar skills. I was standing a bit ahead of them in the line, talking to someone like an older lady next to me and asking her where she was heading to. And I hear in the background this, is that Jordan? And sure enough, it's a Libertarian Party member who I'd not met in person before, but who I know on X and other socials, who lives in my part of the world. And it was him and his wife and two kids. So it was pretty cool to meet a Libertarian Party member in person for the first time. And I wouldn't have that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this disruption to the public transport and bus alternative that I found myself on. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, silver linings and everything, I guess. So I hope you guys are all enjoying what must be almost the start of the Christmas break for most people. If you are new to the channel and if you're watching and you're not a subscriber, I've set the notification, I've set the message settings for the chat to you must be a subscriber to comment, but you only have to be a subscriber for 5 minutes. So if you've stumbled across this live in the algorithm and you're not a subscriber to the channel and you want to chat or contribute or ask a question, you can hit the subscribe button, and after 5 minutes, you'll be able to engage with the chat. As I said, I am not exactly sure fully how to drive this yet. I'm not, I don't think, able to see who is watching the stream. I can see the count, like the number of people, and I can see anyone who's messaging in the comments. So hello, Darth Goob, and hello, Melissa. I'm not sure if there's many more than just you guys, but if anyone else is there and wants to chat, tonight's going to be a really, really chill, really informal live stream. I said I was going to do one a couple of weeks ago and I didn't get a chance to. So definitely just working out all the new settings on YouTube. They're new to me, and working out how to drive the YouTube channel. And I know when I watch YouTubers that I really like, I love the live streams they do because it gives me a chance to kind of get to know them and sort of see them as a person, and through comments and stuff like that, interact and have a bit more of a conversation. So please feel free if you've got any questions or anything you want to ask. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and pop it in the chat. So basically the plan for tonight, the loose plan, was going to be just having a little bit of a chat about some of the events of the last week. It's been a big week, obviously, with the incident, the massacre that occurred in Bondi Beach in Sydney. Tragically, there were obviously a dozen or so people killed in that terror attack. And obviously, as libertarians, we condemn violence against others. It's a violation of the non-aggression principle, and these people deserve to go about their lives without being afraid of being gunned down in the horrific way they were. So obviously, the deepest sympathies and condolences from me to the victims and their families, and the people that even had to kind of witness or be a part of that, who weren't killed. There's a lot of ways people can be harmed and have damage done to them, and I'm sure that experience will probably have ripple effects for the people that were there and the people that saw it in person, but also sometimes seeing something playing out on X or on videos or whatever, that can actually have a pretty big impact on people as well. I remember when the Ukraine war first sort of started up again after COVID. I think it must have been about that time. And yeah, I know that a lot of the staff I had at the bakery, the Beechworth Bakery in Bendigo at the time, a lot of them were on TikTok, and they were seeing like reels of war atrocities and pretty graphic frontline war footage from the Ukraine on their phones, and they were really finding it quite traumatizing. And I'm like, stop looking at it. Like, put the TikTok down, put the algorithm down. It's going to be showing you all this pretty horrible stuff. So it's interesting with the work I do with the Free Speech Union, and a lot of the stuff we advocate for is for people's right to watch things if they so choose. But often I personally choose not to watch certain content. Like for myself, I've seen a lot of pretty horrible stuff. I've been robbed at gunpoint. I've seen real violence and stabbings and things like that in my own life. And for me personally, I try to avoid watching content like that if I don't have to see it. For example, I personally didn't watch the Irinya murder, the murder of the Ukrainian migrant to the US. Like I've gone out of my way not to watch that footage. Like I've seen stills and things of it, and obviously can read between the lines what's obviously happened, but it can be quite hard to avoid sometimes. You have to really make a big effort. If you're not expecting to see something, you can kind of see stuff before you really plan to. So just, be kind to yourself. It's not a sort of a snowflake or a wussy thing to find stuff like that pretty distressing, and sometimes to be able to need to unpack it or whatever. So, but from my point of view, I think very quickly after the events that happened at Bondi, I was anticipating what the government would do. Libertarians can be quite cynical people sometimes in what we predict will be the response to things, but unfortunately, we're also often very correct. And I know myself, several other libertarian voices, the Free Speech Union, were all kind of highlighting that, unfortunately, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, and the government's response to things like this is often to take knee-jerk, simplistic reaction to sort of focus on the things that are in their control, and to, basically, sorry, the hay fever's kicking up a bit again today. It was pretty dry and windy, which is a bad combo, but the government will tend to think not what is the underlying real cause of this problem, not what steps can we take to stop this from happening again in future from an evidence-based point of view, but what can we do now? What levers can we pull to show and to make people feel that we care, or that we're being responsive, or that, we've got things under control. And unfortunately, often that leads to government doing things that are not the right things, not actually targeted towards the harm that's been caused. Like in this case, obviously the primary source of the harm is radical Islam. Like that's unavoidable. You can't say that it's just, hate more generally. You can't say that it's just even anti-Semitism. I think that it's very clear this particular incident was a radical Islam terrorist attack. And unfortunately, these days, it's become a lot less easy to describe things as they are than it was perhaps in the late 90s and early 2000s, before and post September 11. Like there wouldn't have been any hesitation in those times to describe something like what has happened. And it's the deadliest terror attack on Australian soil. Certainly one of the largest mass killings in terms of body count in recent history. But I think in terms of an actual carried out Islamic terror attack, it's the kind of thing where, from my experience, a lot of times ASIO and other police services would love to describe something like this as a lone gunman, lone wolf type scenario. But in this case, obviously there were two people. So that immediately kind of prevents them from being able to say that. And even though it was a father and son, they were known to each other. And that kind of means it could theoretically have been them radicalizing together independently within their family, and not necessarily having a broader terror network per se. It does mean that, that there was a broader kind of plan, and that there was more afoot than just someone waking up and deciding this is what they wanted to do and not telling anyone. So really, the government has dropped the ball here in a lot of ways, because they already have a huge amount of legal power on the books to deal with radical terrorism, and to deal with the underlying problems that probably could have actually prevented this from happening. Like, ASIO have more powers now than they've ever had before. They have more funding now than they've ever had before. And you can't help but feel that when there's been all this stuff in the news about this this social cohesion task force, this anti-far right task force, essentially, which is basically targeting the NSN and others, that there's this huge amount of resources focusing on like far right hate groups. And that obviously comes at the cost of resources that could have been spent focusing on the actual type of risk that eventuated in terms of Islamic terrorism. And whether they had pieces of information that might have suggested something like this was going to happen and they ignored them. We know that at least one of the attackers was on some kind of no-fly list or was on some sort of terror watch list, yet they or their relative had 6 registered firearms. Like, that would be unheard of if it was sort of a different scenario with someone suspected of having sovereign citizen or far right views. They would be absolutely on the radar, and it's difficult to imagine that they'd get access to the same sort of weaponry. So it's really a big it's a big failure on the part of Australian intelligence services, and it's not as if they didn't have the power or the resources. They've just missed it. They've dropped the ball, and that hasn't been in a vacuum either. To be fair, like, obviously there are a lot of people who, myself included, are very concerned about the use of so-called anti-Semitic attacks that were sort of cast as being born out of the population, like that the Australian people were committing these attacks. And then it turned out that those attacks, or those planned attacks, like the caravan, the Dural inquiry in New South Wales was looking into, it turns out that a lot of that has been essentially paid for and staged by foreign actors, like foreign saboteurs, essentially, to essentially target the Jewish community in Australia, but also potentially to actually target our lawmaking and to try to actually achieve the effects they've had from the lawmaking point of view. So that has been happening, and there are real concerns about the motivations for that and the extent to which there is genuine anti-Semitism in the community, that there's a lot of people who believe the actual Australian community in general does not have as high levels of anti-Semitism as the government has been trying to make out to justify these hate speech laws, etc. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people in the community and that there aren't elements of the Islamic community that don't adhere to the tenets of radical Islam and that don't really want to commit violence towards Jews. But so this risk that's manifested and the actual violence that's happened has not come from the place or the source that the mainstream media and the intelligence services have been worried about. So it's like they're the eye of Sauron and the spotlight's fixed on one area, and then you've had something just come through that it's completely missed because it wasn't looking for it. So, it's just a reminder that government is very bad at predicting what's going to happen and that often they will back the wrong horse, I guess, in terms of, the government knows best. Obviously, national security and protection of the community from violence is one of the core roles of the state that most people would believe is an important and necessary function of the state. So when I say the state, I'm talking about like just, the government. Most people would say that it's one of the most foundational things that they would expect the government to do in return for their tax money. And here the government's failed comprehensively. There's no other way of putting it. Both in preventing it from happening and then in responding to it. There's a lot of concerns around the inadequacy of the police response, how it was able to go on for so long, why police were so far away, why they hesitated, all that sort of stuff. We're just entering into a stage, I think, where the reality is the emperor has no clothes. And that reality that there's no one, that the cavalry isn't coming, not only in your home if something happens, like if someone engages in aggravated burglary or armed robbery or something in your home, the idea that the police will be 45 minutes to an hour away if you call them. And we'll talk about maybe later on tonight about the castle doctrine thing and like how the libertarian response to that would be to allow people to defend themselves. Well, it's the same in the public space, except in a public setting, again, you've got even more confidence, or you should have more confidence that that the government is essentially going to make those spaces safe. But we've seen that hasn't happened. And so if the government can't fulfill that most basic role that many people think it should occupy. I personally think this is a great example of why these kind of so-called fundamental government responsibilities, often the government actually fails to meet. I think this is a great example of why there should be more ability for shopkeepers, for citizens, for people to actually have the means to defend themselves, because fundamentally the police are very reactive. They're not going to be there when they need to be to stop something tragic from happening. And the reality is, this is just proof of the fact that the best defense and the best way to avoid this kind of tragedies, or ensure that they're with as little loss of life as possible, is to have an armed population. Another example I can think about is, or an armed and trained population. An example I can think about is in Holland. There was a Dutch train, and there was an attack on that train by Islamic State aligned militants, and there happened to be 3 Marines on the train. I think 2 or 3 Marines who just happened to be on holiday or on leave or something like that in between deployments, and they were on that train, and they were able to wrestle the weapons from the attackers and essentially disable them or kill them. And so you saw this situation during this attack, and I'll have to listen to the audio again, because but I believe in the audio I heard the gentleman. It was either the people filming the person who had managed to take the gun off one of the attackers, or it was the person who taken the gun off the attacker himself. But there were people in that video. The audio was saying, "Where's the police? Where's the police?" And this guy's actually gotten a weapon off one of the attackers and has this guy lined up in the sights. And the commentary or the audio is, "Where are the police?" It's like, how passive are we as a society? How worried about what's going to happen to us, and unfamiliar with or afraid to defend ourselves, and to expect that the government's just going to swoop in like Deus Ex Machina and save the day. How far has our society fallen into dependency and lack of personal accountability and responsibility that we would watch that unfold, even with a gun in hand? It's I find it very, very difficult to understand. And I've had situations in my life which are far less extreme, but still a similar vibe, where I've had, this was actually shortly after I was endorsed for the Senate, and I was coming back from Melbourne on the train on, I think it was Anzac Day. So it was a long weekend, and there was a father and son on the train on the way back. They'd been up on the train, the same train I took up. They've obviously gone to the footy or the soccer or whatever. They were drinking all day. The son would have been 16. The dad was older, in his 40s. They were kind of a Croatian or Balkans background. And on the way back on the train, the father was really drunk, really filthy mood, basically hitting his son, being really abusive to his son, abusing other passengers on the train. There were some black people on the train that he was getting in their face and, dropping the N-word with the hard R and everything, really just being a terror and kind of really putting a lot of people in fear on the train. And there were a lot of people around, a lot of people that were taller and big people just watching it happen, not intervening. And I sort of made eye contact with another guy on the train, and he stood up, and we both approached this guy at the same time, and basically said, as the train got into the next station, said, "Look, mate, you're getting off here." And basically just grabbed him and pretty much threw him off the train. But that's just not normal. That most people just look the other way and choose not to see things. Another example, recently in Melbourne, there was a really viral video that went around of a woman kicking, a zombie apocalypse sort of thing, kicking the door in of a jewelry store. And people just watching, it's I understand, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what they're capable of. It's not your property. But to passively watch society disintegrate, to watch behavior that's so antisocial like that, it's everything's outsourced. Nothing is anyone's problem. So it's no one's problem, So I think there's those dimensions to it. And unfortunately, what we've seen in the aftermath of the massacre is we've seen the two very, very predictable outcomes, which is basically cracking down on gun ownership. And you're seeing messaging a million people in Melbourne own rifles, or 1 million people in Sydney own rifles. Why do we need this many guns? There's more guns in Australian society now than there were during the Port Arthur massacre, all this sort of stuff. And it's there's lies, damned lies, and statistics. And it's if people have these weapons within the confines of the rules you've got, it's none of your business why they want them or why they have them. Like, they've obviously got them for reasons that comply with the regulations, because the police have said they're happy to have them and they're lawful firearms. And, you know, in this instance, the fact that the firearms that were used in the attack were registered and were licensed and lawful, that's a huge indictment on the police. It's not on society to bear that burden and to suffer or suffer the consequences of something that the police have essentially dropped the ball on. So we've had, on the one hand, calls for greater restrictions on guns. We've got this gun buyback. I don't understand how you can call it a buyback when the police have never, or the government's never owned the guns. Like, it can't be a buyback unless the government believes that all of your property belongs to it as of right and you're just borrowing it from them, which I suspect that language actually does betray. Like, I actually think that is what they think. You know, anything you have is given to you by the mercy of the state, or the generosity of the state, including your home, including whatever possessions. And, you know, they're just being kind by not taking that from you. Like, anything you have is yours by their grace. You know, and you hear this kind of attitude and sense of entitlement towards people's property and towards people's money when you hear tax concessions. Like, you hear, tax cuts being referred to as, tax exemptions. So not collecting tax on something is referred to as a loss, like as a deficit or a lost income, lost revenue, even though the default state is not taxed and any tax is revenue. But they say, like, no, okay, the default state is basically taxed, and if we don't tax you, then that's a loss to the government. Like, the government was prima facie entitled to that money, and they chose not to take it from you, so that's a loss to them. Like, you basically owe them by default, and if they choose not to collect it, then that's the government losing revenue. It's like, no, that revenue was never the government's in the first place. Like, I hope that point, like, that distinction makes sense. It's like, tax is the unnatural state, untaxed is the natural state. But you often hear in the way government and Keynesian economists and the left talk about things, it's like, oh, well, we're not taxing you. That's a loss to the state. It's like no. So one of the comments here, now I'm just going to see if I can actually bring this up onto the screen. I've just pinned it. So I'm just going to see if I can actually bring this up onto the screen. Like, I'm pretty sure super chats do this. But I just have to see if I can actually highlight comments. I'm not sure. Not sure if I actually can. But anyway, that's all right. It doesn't seem as though I can actually put comments up on the screen. But yeah, so this comment says, 100% not normal. My wife was in the hospital maternity ward after giving birth. A druggie snuck in and started causing a scene. No one did anything, a complete joke. So it's just talking about my earlier comment about people being very passive, like people not taking agency over, like, their environment. So not feeling like they're part of society to actually have a stake in how things play out outside of them, like to stay in their own lane and kind of just put their head down and look at their phone and choose to ignore what's going on. So yeah, we'll keep going with the legal kind of ramifications of the Bondi Massacre, what's going on. But I just wanted to quickly point out, if anyone wants to marvel at my training singlet, it's raised a few eyebrows when I've gone into gyms before. I'm at home gym now, so it doesn't really raise eyebrows in home gym because I'm just there on my own. But this is one of my favorite singlets. It's Hogweights, and it's the School of Swolcraft and Liftery. And you've got Liftendor, Slither Gaines, Hufflepuff, and Raven Curl. So yeah, that's not quite the chainsaw or the Don't Tread on Me t-shirts. It's not my usual Libertarian t-shirt fare, but yeah, this is a nice one for the gym to go in, lift heavy, wearing nerdy shit. It's pretty fun. So the Enlightened Citizen says anything that replaces voluntary exchange with coercion is unnatural, because in nature you keep what you produce or what you freely trade for. 100%. And this is the thing, like, the sense of entitlement and the sense of, how do I put this? So it's really interesting. And I'd like, guys, obviously I've got like a rough plan of the stuff I want to talk about, and I'm going to try to sort of go back to it as we go, but I want to engage with your questions and discussion as well. And hopefully that'll take us in different directions and things as well. But I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they basically said, "Oh, what did they say? They're like, oh, anarchy. So the lack of government, like absence of government, isn't natural. It's the market is natural. Capitalism is natural." And I said to this person, I'm like, they are the same thing. Like in the absence of government, voluntary exchange, and like the market, capitalism, what we call capitalism, is literally the natural state of things. Like in the absence of government, you will only get what you exchange for something valuable for others, or what you want to, or what you're given. If someone values charity or values a relationship to want to build something and give you something to build that relationship, like if you move into a neighborhood, and I've seen this because living in the country a lot growing up, my mum would bring food to someone who moves into the area, the little valley rural area they live in. If someone comes to the area and moves there, mum will bring like a casserole, or welcome to the neighborhood, essentially. Like that's a pretty old school way of looking at things, but that's still what she does. And in a world without the government, like that's nothing to do with the government. The government doesn't say, oh, you must welcome your neighbors to the neighborhood with a casserole. And if they did, people probably wouldn't do it because it wouldn't make them feel good. Like it wouldn't feel like they were doing something of their own volition. It's actually the same thing they found out with blood donation, because in America they had a trial where they really wanted to raise blood donation rates because they weren't getting enough, or they perceived they weren't getting enough donations through pure voluntary donation. And so they introduced a payment for giving blood in a couple of states in the US. And what they found was blood donation rates actually went backwards because they were actually undermining the intrinsic motivation that someone had to do that voluntary thing for a philanthropic reason, for like a virtuous reason, for someone to feel good about their decision. They actually undermined that motivation by paying them. So that's a really interesting example of sometimes how it doesn't have to be got to tax the casserole, Darth Gibb says. But like that's an example of how voluntary exchange, like the market, the free market, can be a market in philanthropy and non-economic exchange. There's a market for care, for relationships. Like everything is a market. All a market is the sum of all human interactions in a particular field. And at the macro level, like micro within a nation, the market is the sum of all human relationships and interactions within a country or within a state or whatever. At the macro, it's global, but it doesn't have to just be dollar exchange. It can be contra, like labor for service, or it can be giving, like free voluntary exchange as well, like for donations or philanthropy. But that is the natural state. And so when people say, oh, anarchy, like it's this scary thing, they're thinking that anarchy is like Lord of the Flies. But anarchy is actually the world that really exists really pretty independently of the government already. Like the emperor has no clothes. This is the thing that I like to try to explain to people, is like the world of an anarcho-capitalist, what it would look like. To be an anarcho-capitalist, you have to basically believe that most things that already exist independently of the government and would continue to exist. The only things that would fall away would be things that are born of coercion. And some things would still exist, but with different motivations or different incentives. So, roads would still be built, but it wouldn't just be built by redistribution and coercion gun to head. It'd be built by cooperatives of people or toll roads or whatever who would invest in it. And so I think that the world looking a lot like it does now is kind of going to my point of government wants to respond to disasters like this, not to actually solve the problem on an evidence basis, but their greatest fear is that people will think they have no control. And what I believe, and I think what COVID showed, is not actually how powerful the government is, but how weak it is. Because the reality is, whether it's global economic trends, whether it's technology trends like AI, whether it's a global pandemic, whatever, the government of a nation state like Australia actually has very little influence over those things. There's very little that they can do except respond to these trends. And I believe that these kind of knee-jerk reactions to tragedies like what has happened in Bondi is to essentially keep that legitimacy, to sort of make people associate the government as being responsible or as being in control. And yeah, I actually think that it's a sign of weakness, not power, that this is happening more often and it's being more broad, more claimed over more things. So the second thing that is kind of happening as a consequence of the Bondi Massacre is this new proposed hate speech, strengthening of hate speech laws, and they want to essentially decrease the threshold in some ways. And they also want to add in new things like advocating racial supremacy as hate speech. Now, do I believe people should be advocating racial supremacy? Do I believe in racial supremacy as a concept in terms of like, one race is better than another or whatever? No, I don't. But I think that you can't legislate to prevent people from having those ideas. And an organization like the NSN will just take further government legal intervention, ignore it, martyr themselves, and do a bit of jail. Like, these guys don't mind going to prison to make themselves martyrs for free speech, basically. And all you're doing is you're trying to suppress this thought or this ideology. You're actually just going to feed into their narratives of oppression and control. You're going to tell people you can't talk about that, you can't say that. So the people that do say that or do talk about it essentially get to more or less like hide, like as in they don't have to actually advocate their ideas. If they're not allowed to, all they say is, well, the government doesn't want you to know. And then it's all hush hush, whispered in quiet where no one can rebut it. And people feel like they're rebelling against the government, against society, because there's this forbidden knowledge. And it's a tale as old as time. What a lot of people don't know in Weimar Germany, like the Weimar Republic, before the Nazis took over, there were efforts to suppress National Socialism. And, there were efforts to try to crack down on paramilitaries on the streets, all this sort of stuff. And essentially, it ended up just fueling the problem a lot more. So, yeah, I think that we should let people speak. We should, even when what they say is objectively wrong, hateful, bigoted, because only then, when we actually allow them to speak and go, okay, go on, tell us what you think, like tell us all about it. Only when they're actually allowed to express everything fully will people hear it and go, actually, there's some holes there, or this is a different view or idea. And that's one reason why I will typically try to argue the toss. Like I block some accounts on X and stuff when they're being very like just trolling and not actually engaging in conversation. But I know people who have de-radicalized themselves from far right Nazi ideology. So it's not a one-way street. A lot of people can essentially grow out of that thought and those ideas, and we have to think about and understand, like, what is it that motivates people to those ideologies? And a lot of the time it's fear, it's disadvantage, it's a desire to belong, all those sorts of things which society is just stripping away from young men in particular. So it's like angry, disempowered, disconnected young men who don't believe that the system gives them a way to advocate for themselves and to actually win. Like, they stop believing the system actually is designed to allow them to succeed. And in a lot of ways, that's a fair criticism. Like the socialists and the Nazis both analyze the problem pretty well. It's just their ideas are cancer, essentially, to a society. So we've got another comment here saying, raising taxes and cutting spending is the only way to avoid bankruptcy. I'd agree with half of that, Sam. So I think that raising taxes and I'll give you an example of where this doesn't work or where it's very obviously not working. And it's an extreme example, but ultimately the same problem will arise in nearly every area you want to raise taxes. So you have to cut spending 100%. And the reason cutting spending will work is because you're cutting spending in order to bring down the size of government, firstly, so you have less economic activity that's in the government sphere. Rothbard says that The government, or the state is the wording he uses, can never create. So they can only redistribute or change. So they can take something and they can modify it, they can move it around, they can redistribute it. But every time they do that, it comes at a cost to the thing. So there's always like every time the government touches something, it loses value. So it only ever loses value. It never gains value. There's no generation of value by government activity. It's basically the cup game. So it's just shuffling things around. But it's not just shuffling things around. It's shuffling things around at a loss because you've got the public servants who are involved in moving the money. You've got the layers of inefficiency and all this sort of thing. So you always have a cost or a decay to the matter. It's like physics, right? Like the government is incapable of creation. They're only capable of redistribution and essentially changing the form of something. I'd call it corrupting the thing from whatever it is to something else, and it always comes at a cost. When it comes to raising taxes, I see that argument a lot, and a lot of people, the thing they think of is like they want to raise taxes on resources, for example, like gas and oil, and they'll point to like the Scandinavian model and all that sort of stuff. And I caution how sustainable that is in the long run. Like a lot of those countries, they may seem like they're wealthy and prosperous now, but they're spending just as much as they're collecting in taxes. So they're not following that model of raising taxes and cutting spending. They're raising taxes to facilitate and fuel much greater size of government, much greater government intervention in society. But the other thing that raising taxes does is it distorts the market. And the great example of this is looking at the cigarette market at the moment, where the government is raising taxes. And what it's doing is it's just reducing the size of the legitimate tobacco market compared to the black market. So you now have a huge, phenomenal portion of the total tobacco market in Australia is literally regulated by organised crime. And the government's collecting 0% tax on that growing and growing number. So during the federal election, the government had to revise the estimate of tax they were going to collect from the tobacco excise. It was meant to be something like 15 billion in excise. During the federal election, they had two revisions. One was down to 11 billion, the first one, and then the next one was down to 9 billion. So from when they budgeted like the previous year, predicting 5, it went down to $6 billion. And the tax percentage just keeps going up. So theoretically, they're like, oh, we want to collect more tax. But it's actually just distorting the market so much that it's creating a window for organised crime to service that market. So I understand what you say, Sam, and it seems like the argument or the emotional argument behind raising taxes is this idea that there's some people that are not paying their fair share, or that there are other parts of the world where certain things get taxed more, etc. Australia has a lot of problems in their tax system, but what we charge for like royalties and resource taxes is not one of those problems. And in fact, it's one of the few things that's kept our country out of recession. Because if you think about it, Australia, the joke is that we can basically pull things out of the ground and build things, like in terms of property. So it's like a property and mining resource market, essentially. That's like the two things Australia has. And companies like BHP, companies like Rio Tinto, all that sort of stuff, they are not bound to be here. They're not required to be. We have a lot of resources, and they like, doing business in Australia. But their cost of doing business in Australia is also much higher than in other countries, in terms of wages, in terms of like risk, in terms of regulations. So they expect that if they're going to do business here at a greater cost in those areas, then they basically expect that they're not going to be paying premium tax on the back end as well. So I think in reality, that whole raising taxes argument is an argument the Teals use. It's that, punters politics constantly going on about this. And I think it's a real false economy. And ultimately, increasing taxes just decreases productivity. If you tax something, there will be less of it. So we want more of employment, which is payroll tax and income tax. We want more of sales activity, GST, like the things that the GST applies to, transactions and sales. There are less of those things because the GST exists, and because the GST is what we're relying on. So Libertarians basically will always vote against an increase in taxes and always vote against a decrease in liberties. And yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think that raising taxes component, an interesting thing that John Humphreys, who was the founder of the Libertarian Party and he's a personal friend of mine, he said at the Friedman conference several years ago, something I'll never forget, where he basically said, all the government would have to do is freeze spending. So as in not even decrease or cut, just freeze spending in real terms. So stop increasing spending and change nothing else, no tax changes, nothing, just literally freeze spending. And the economy would actually go back into surplus within 4 or 5 years, simply just by no new spending. So the Australian economy has this real ability to generate income, but we're spending and increasing spending faster than we're earning. So it doesn't even have to be cuts. Cuts, I think, are possible, and there's a lot of places where the government is really bloated and too big. But the whole thing of increased taxes, it's like our taxes are fine. We don't have a taxation problem. If anything, we need to streamline and cut taxes. We need to reform so we've got properly indexed income tax brackets. We need to do a whole bunch of reform when it comes to tax. But with spending, even without actually cutting like we would say needs to happen, like Malay's done, even without that, just freezing spending in real terms would see us return to surplus very quickly. So just remember that when you're hearing people talk about increased tax as necessary to get us back into black. The Victorian government is increasing taxes left, right, and centre. There was a new pets tax the other day. There's a new parking space tax. There's all these sorts of taxes, and I can guarantee you Victoria cannot tax its way out of the black hole it's in. It won't even touch the sides. So, so the free speech dimension of the Bondi Massacre is really concerning because essentially you've got these really, really poorly drafted laws. Often politicians make laws very badly anyway. They rush, and if they're rushed in a situation like this, then the laws they're making are going to be even worse than normal. And that's pretty bad. And this idea that essentially speaking about these issues or talking about things is the problem really doesn't hold a lot of water. When in reality, the government's not enforcing a lot of laws it's already got. One thing I thought that was interesting, I don't agree with the AJA and I don't agree with Avi on everything, but a broken clock's right twice a day. And both Avi and the AJA have said, like, we don't need new gun laws, we don't need new speech laws, like existing laws being enforced in a way that is directed at the problem, which is obviously a subset of the Islamic community that is sympathetic to these kind of radical ideals. That is what needs to happen. It's not more laws are going to solve the problem, because if existing laws aren't being enforced, then that's just going to be the same if there's new laws. So that's kind of like the free speech side of the Bondi Massacre. You're going to see quite a bit of stuff coming out from the Free Speech Union in the aftermath of that. New South Wales are proposing some tighter gun restrictions, I think, as well. And overall, there's this push to increase hate speech legislation. And the Free Speech Union, I can tell you, is going to be developing a campaign and a tool to help you write to your local member or senator, whoever. So there's going to be a bit of stuff coming out about that over the next couple of days as well. So I didn't realize we've been going for 43 minutes. Time has flown. I probably only have an hour tonight. So if you've got any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you want to ask a question, you only have to have been a subscriber for 5 minutes to shoot a question through. So there's a fair overlap with my Twitter audience, I think, and the YouTube audience. There's some people who are following YouTube and other channels. I'm at Ditloff4cents, which is the same thing as this YouTube channel everywhere. So on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Ditloff4, the number 4 cents. You can find me there everywhere. But for those who might be watching, or people who are subscribers to my channel watching this afterwards, who don't follow me on other platforms, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, what some of the things ahead for me are in terms of what 2026 is going to look like. So basically, 2025 has not been the worst year of my life. For those who know me and have followed my story for a while, again, on other platforms where I've spoken about it more than I have on YouTube. So my past involves some years that were much worse than 2025 in terms of things that happened in my life and mistakes I made in my 20s. I struggled with drug and alcohol addiction, and I also bought and ran a business that failed because I was very inexperienced and very ego driven and arrogant and didn't want to learn and thought I knew everything. And that combined with addiction is a really bad combination when small business is hard enough anyway. And that business ended up failing, owing people quite a lot of money. So, and I'm still paying off those debts and dealing with the consequences of that today. But it was, an experience that really changed my life. I went to prison for 27 months and was able to turn my life around. And that journey's ongoing. So I've had worse years. 2025 is definitely not the worst year of my life, but it's been pretty rough in other ways. My long-term relationship came to an end. So I'm currently separated, probably divorces on the cards with my ex-wife. And the election, in the scheme of things, that the election loss is not really a big deal. We were always up against it, and we were sort of tilting at a windmill to try to push a Senate candidate from the Libertarian Party across the line with the Senate anyway, and the election turned out to be a big landslide for Labor. So everyone on our side of politics took a big L. But in the aftermath of the election, there was also some disruption to my legal admission. I've been basically delayed by about 12 months. So I went through all the process and got my compliance certificate and basically on the threshold of admission to legal practice in February of this year. And then essentially I still can't talk fully about it, but it's almost concluded. I think on Monday or Tuesday I should get the final information about it. Basically there was a complaint against the law firm I was working at doing my articles, and I was assisting to manage that matter. And the Legal Services Board, who regulate lawyers in Victoria, are very, very slow, very, very notorious for taking a long time. They were looking into a whole bunch of stuff around the complaint to do with my boss and my former employer. I was just kind of tangential in it, but I've essentially just been parked waiting for that to be resolved through most of this year. So I haven't talked about that a lot, because obviously confidentiality and not being really sure what would happen, but they've communicated to me that that's going to be basically dealt with and done this year, they've said. So they, unlike most government departments, they work through until Christmas Eve. So I've got to make sure I, give the Victorian Legal Services Board credit where it's due. They work hard until Christmas Eve, regulating the legal profession. So I should find out on Monday or Tuesday, and I'll definitely share with you guys. I might do a video about it if I get good news on that front. But that is a point where I'm able to talk about it now. But that's been a delay. And a lot of people who were following my journey in the campaign probably were thinking it seemed like Jordan was almost there with the admission, and then it's sort of been on pause, and he's been side questing and doing other adventures, and that's kind of the reason. That's what's been going on in the background. So that's almost done. I'm also really excited to share that I'm starting a PhD next year. So I applied for and was granted a PhD along with a scholarship, which is really exciting. So that kind of takes a bit of the pressure off and gives me the ability to pursue the PhD, but also pursue admission to the bar next year. So next year is going to be a pretty crazy year. 2024, where I was campaigning for most of that year for the Senate, running full tilt and just going hard. That tempo will definitely be back very shortly in next year. So you'll be seeing all of the different things I'm doing, and you'll be like, how is all this happening? Lots of exciting things on the horizon. So next year is going to be pretty off the chain, pretty crazy. I'm also running next year for the state executive for the Victorian Libertarian Party. And then we've got a state election. So 2026 should be a very, very full-on but very rewarding personally and professionally and politically, hopefully, year ahead. So I'm very much rallied and back on the counterattack. Sam, thank you. That's a lovely sentiment. I didn't lose my wife. She's still around. She's not departed from us. She's just we're not together anymore. And look, honestly, I've shared a little bit about this on X and all that sort of stuff. But I met Georgie, my wife, when she was 22, so I was 30. I'd just gotten out of prison, and basically, I was the really only long-term relationship she'd ever been in. We were together for 7 years, but during that time, my life changed a lot. When I got out of prison, I basically thought, I'd be doing pretty well if, firstly, I didn't go back to prison, if I stayed off drugs and alcohol and could turn my life around and not go back to prison, that would be a big win. And a lot of people don't manage to do that. So that is something I'm really proud of. And, this year, just gone in July, was my 10-year anniversary, completely sober and free of drugs and alcohol. So I don't drink anymore. And yeah, basically recovery for over 10 years, which is pretty amazing. But during that time, that 7-year time, like my world really expanded a lot. Like when I first got out of prison, I thought if I could get a decent job and I got a management role with the Beechworth Bakery, I was managing teams of 30 people, and I was, I finished my business degree, which I started in prison. And like, that was basically, I thought at the time, pretty much as good as life could get. And it was like, a smaller life than what I have now and what I thought was possible. And then as things kind of developed, like through COVID, I went back to university and I started my postgrad law degree. And I also got back involved in politics, and sort of just slowly but surely politics started to become bigger and take on more of a role. And I found out that I could run for federal politics, which I didn't think I could do. I thought that my criminal record prevented me from being a political candidate, and that wasn't the case. And basically just like my life became a lot busier and more hectic, but also just the scope of my life. Like my world grew a lot bigger. My ambitions grew a lot bigger. A lot of doors I thought that were closed forever kind of got kicked down and burst open, really. And so that just meant that like what my life would look like, what our life together would look like, suddenly was really different. Like it wasn't suddenly, it was over time, but like that last couple of years in particular, because we got married in 2022, late 2022, so just after all lockdowns and stuff. And that sort of next 2 years was me getting my first job in law, so leaving the bakery, starting legal work, getting a lot more involved in the party and getting endorsed as the Senate candidate. So like, yeah, like it just became clear, I think, that what our lives together would look like and what my life was always going to look like would be really different to where we started. And that's not good or bad. It's just what it is. And essentially, I think there was some underlying cracks in the foundation before the election. And then just through the course of that time, at the end of the election, we basically, had the conversation. And, it wasn't something I was planning. I hoped that we could kind of make it work. But, I think at the same time, it's not the big dramatic thing where something's happened that's a particular massive schism or trauma or whatever. It's just we've grown apart, and we're both taken a lot from the relationship, both learned a lot about ourselves, and everything you learn in a relationship you take to your next one as well. So, and I'm 37 now, so I've learned that before, and we didn't have kids. So at the end of the day, there's not other people bound up in the consequences of that decision where there would be if there were kids and stuff as well. So I've still got plenty of time. I'm still very young, still lots of exciting things ahead. And 2025 was pretty rough. That first couple of months post-election, dealing with all that, dealing with the election results. But the last 4 or 5 months in particular have been really, really good, and getting back on the horse and really finding the next steps and what my next mission is. So thanks for asking the question. Really appreciate the sentiments, and happy to share and talk about it. So Angus Fisher Marks says, how would you frame decreasing the size of government in a way that would be palatable for the average Australian, since so many people are dependent on the government these days? That's a really, really good question. And it is the quintessential problem where when you say basically like make the government smaller, a lot of Australians automatically assume that you want to cut like schools, services, like core services. Like most people don't realize how big the government has gotten and how many things they're doing, and like just the bloat, like the sheer amount of government stuff that goes on that isn't that core, cuddly feeling of the government of like, oh, this is like core service. People actually don't realize how much fat there is. So I think one part of it is really highlighting that and kind of emphasizing, showing people like how obscene and how disordered the government has gotten. And if I had been elected to the Senate, that would have been a really big focus for me, to really like put a spotlight on what, what is being done in our name, basically like how obscene and how large government has gotten. Because I think most Australians just have no concept of it. Like they think that all government is the stuff you see day to day, frontline services, They don't realize how many ridiculously over remunerated executives there are. They don't realize how many, you know, Sam, that's wow. Okay, it could be worse, I suppose, in my relationship. But yeah, that's pretty savage. That's not something any man wants to hear. But yeah, with respect to the size of government thing, I think that framing it in terms of, I personally think that Australians don't like the idea of public servants or public sector. Like, I think that most Australians don't like the idea of bureaucracy. Like, as in, if you say we want to we want to slash the wasteful areas of government spending, we want to get rid of the laptop class. That's a phrase I used a bit during the election, and I think it really resonated well with people, because the people who struggled during COVID, the people who really felt COVID the hardest, were people who were working in frontline jobs like me, in the sense of that essential services like hospitality, supermarkets, all that sort of stuff. There were a lot of people through COVID who life was good, and those people are the people who voted Labor, the people who were like the public servants, the work from home, professional class. A lot of those people didn't relate to the people who had to drive to work, the people who had to wear masks and be in environments that were risky. You know, how risky you think they were during the pandemic, that's an open question. But so I think I think the right way to describe that target is to emphasize the really low-hanging fruit, like stuff that people would agree is just obscene, like unjustifiable spending. And there's a lot of that, luckily. So I think we need to start with the stuff that is so obviously above, like beyond the pale, like highlighting that stuff, educating people about what's being done. Pick examples. Like, I think that as libertarians, we don't need to just say, oh, we want to decrease the size of government by X% or whatever. I think what we should do, what we should be doing, is finding examples or seizing on examples where there's just unjustifiable waste or rorting or overspending, like whatever the case might be, and just prosecuting that hard. You don't have to, like, there's something that this is a little bit of a digression tangent, but I think you'll see where I'm going with it. At our last federal AGM for the Libertarian Party, so it was back in June, we went to Sydney, and our guest speaker was David Seymour, who's the Deputy Prime Minister in New Zealand. So he's from a party called ACT, which is the Alliance of Consumers and Taxpayers, is what it's called in New Zealand. And they're like a libertarian-inspired party. So they don't call themselves explicitly the Libertarian Party like we do, but they're sort of adjacent to that. They were a bit average, hit and miss with some COVID stuff, unfortunately. But in terms of like the economics and the cultural stuff, in terms of the anti-woke cultural stuff, they're pretty good. And David Seymour basically said, you know, when you walk into McDonald's, the McDonald's staff member doesn't ask you, do you want everything on the menu? They ask you, you ask for what you want. So you come to them with your problem, like, I want whatever. And they say, do you want fries with that? So they give you like one add-on. They're like, okay, so you're here for this problem. Here's our solution to that problem, the product you want. Here's one other thing you might like. And I think libertarians sometimes fall into that trap of wanting to sell the whole menu up front and saying, if you don't accept the whole menu, we don't want you as a customer. And I think we actually have to start with the really easy sells, you know, like meet people where they're at, find out what their problems are. But then I think we also need to really take advantage of, we need to be opportunistic, and much like, so we need to kind of do what the left do in response to things like the Bondi Massacre, and, you know, in response to supermarket gouging or examples of bad corporate behavior or whatever. They're great at taking advantage of a crisis or taking advantage of something that's easy to use to further their agenda. We need to be better at that. We need to know what our agenda is, and we need to be ready to like strike when the iron's hot when they give us an example, because it definitely happens. Like the travel rorts are a great example of that, like the travel expenses thing, that Annika Wells. I think that's a great opportunity for us to say, look at this, here's an example. Like, did you know that all these entitlements are claimed by both sides, major parties? You know, they're both, all of them have their snouts in the trough. So I think seizing on examples like that don't pass the pub test, where people go, fuck you, you know? So I think that's my answer to that question. We need to be really meeting people where they're at, and we need to be using the opportunities that come to sell it case by case. Like, don't sell the whole premise at the front. Like, eventually people go, oh, I've connected the dots here. Like, this is an example of a situation where you're applying this principle, but they don't have to understand the principle at the start to accept what you're actually arguing for. So I hope that answers your question, Angus. That's what I would say. I think we need to be, better at striking while the iron's hot and using situations and using specific examples to basically get runs on the board and to get wins. Yeah, exactly. I think it's a lot of it's information, and a lot of it's really just shining a spotlight on, stuff that anyone normal would go, "What the hell? Like, how is this being?" Like the whole thing with NDIS, where they were having sex workers covered by the NDIS and all this sort of stuff. And when that came out, people were like, "What the?" And it changed pretty quickly, supposedly. Like, so Bill Shorten actually did come through and change a lot of that stuff. But like, that's what they're sensitive to. They're sensitive to specific stuff. They're not sensitive to general stuff. And most people can't process it at the macro. Like, they don't have enough information to join the dots. And they really are tired, overworked, underpaid, hungry, afraid, like all the stuff that the mainstream media and the government, both major parties, want them to be, so that they don't have the capacity. Like, they can't look at the big stuff. So you just go, we're going to eat the elephant one bite at a time. So Enmity6659 asks, what's your vibe on Bondi being a turning point for Albo? Unfortunately, Enmity, I really wish I could say something different, but Albo has proven to be a very effective retail politician. He was much better than Peter Dutton. And I think that he sort of knows his base. And I don't think that normal people will be blaming him, even though they should be. Like, I think that it's undeniable that the government, like certainly ASIO, all these people, the Labor government have dropped the ball because they've been so fixated on what they think the problem is or what they want the problem to be, that they've just missed this. Like, there's no way the government should be able to escape responsibility for this. But what they're doing very quickly is exactly like I said. They're not letting a crust go to waste. They're saying, here's this pre-existing agenda we've got. We want hate speech. We want gun law crackdowns, because the sovereign citizen thing, in WA, they've been taking guns off sovereign citizens, but the federal government is very, very keen to further disarm the population, for sure. So that predated this situation. But I think that basically they will just use this. It's like the Dan Andrews playbook. They will just use this situation to essentially create scapegoats and to say, if you want to be more safe, if you want to feel safer, here's the solutions. Here's the people who are the problem. Here are the people who aren't you that we can crack down on, that you're going to feel safer emotionally. So unfortunately, I don't think Bondi will be a turning point against the Albanese government. I think that there won't be until we have a credible opposition, which may be a long time away, and One Nation aren't that either. Like, One Nation don't want to be that. They basically take as many votes off Labor right as they do off the Liberals, which a lot of people don't know and which they won't tell you. But like, they don't have a vested interest in actually challenging the status quo. They want to be a party of protest that kind of kicks up money from electoral funding to Pauline. I think they might end up in a more important, more pivotal position than they really want to be, because I think that they're going to be, just by name recognition, they're going to be like the only option people know about if they want to protest vote on the right. So I actually think there's a world where, Enmity, I agree. And like what I was saying with that Annika Wells thing, the travel expenses thing was having traction, but now with Bondi happening, and I don't think they're connected. Like, I'm not saying it was one because of the other, but the government's like, oh, look over here. Like, it's like the sort of hustler carnival person where there's the trick, it's like, oh, don't look here, don't look at my hand, look over here, oh, there's something in my hand. The Labor government are very good at doing that, and Albanese is very expert at distracting and deflecting attention, and sort of, they know the news cycle isn't going to maintain it. They know that if they just weather the storm, then they're going to get through and people are going to forget about it. It's going to become yesterday's news. So I really think that's, I can't see, until you have an opposition who will actually prosecute the argument and every week just ram it down their throats, like make it impossible for the media to ignore, make it impossible for the government to ignore, really get through to people. And the Libs just aren't capable of doing that. but like, I think that you're right. These things, it's a little bit like the Victorian example where Jacinta Allen is very unpopular. There's been a lot of things happening in Victoria that a good opposition should be able to nail them on, but they can't seem to land a glove. And it's because the Liberals are so roiled by infighting, so ineffective, so desperate to appease and to be moderate, which is what they think their focus groups are telling them, that they can't prosecute the argument. Like, they can't land the blows and actually generate, like, they can't seem to maintain pressure on the Labor Party. So yeah, that's pretty much what I think. All right, guys, I am on the tail end of some night shift I did in the last couple of weeks. I did 10 days of night shift, I think, over the 2 weeks, and I did my last night shift Thursday night to Friday morning. I try to, when I have night shift, I'll stay awake the whole day after my last night shift finishes, so I can try to go to sleep at a normal time. And I did that last night, but then I had to wake up at 5:30 to go to Edithvale, Chelsea beach to do the rubbish pickup with the Southeast Metro branch. So I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I got sleep when I should have, but it wasn't a lot. And I don't need a lot of sleep, and I'm pretty relentless, but the machine does definitely need to be kept on the road. So this was great. I really enjoyed the live. With my YouTube channel, it's probably not too far away from soon there'll be able to be memberships where people will be able to pay a small, I think it's weekly, but I don't know how frequently they do it, but it'd be a small membership fee to be a member of the channel here on YouTube. And I want to do some content. I was talking to the guy who helps me with my social media, Volunteer, which is he's amazing. He's in the chat now. Thank you. And basically what I want to do with the membership badges or membership subscription when it becomes available on YouTube, I want to actually do, today I've talked a little bit about goal setting and some of the stuff behind the scenes that I'm working on and doing. And I really want to basically bring some of that content into people who are members of the channel. So I really want to do, there'll be some premium content. I want to unpack some of my goal setting a bit, talk a little bit about the things that I'm considering when I'm setting my goals, what my, values and priorities are, how I work out how to go about achieving those, in terms of the actual planning, the granularity of it. Because I know with a lot of channels I watch where it's people who do motivational stuff or people who are busy people that succeed or that achieve goals, often it's really hard to see how they choose those goals, how they actually in the background put in the work to achieve them. Even with this YouTube channel, how I'm actually trying to post consistently and trying to get it monetized, and even just the grind that's involved in that. What my life looks like behind the scenes a little bit in terms of to achieve that work rate and productivity. And also to just some, I guess, mental and physical health stuff as well, because I'm a personal coach, personal trainer qualified, and I do quite a bit of motivational, I have in the past done that sort of motivational and physical coaching stuff as well. And really everything else flows from that. You need to be healthy in mind and body to be able to, move forward at all, really, and to be resilient and survive things as well. So, those things are going to be exciting. And I'm really looking forward to, essentially making this YouTube channel a lot more of a community and a lot more interactive, and basically building the content up as we go along as well. So awesome. Thank you guys for joining, and I'm sure these will get, we're going to try to do them consistently. Mainly a Saturday afternoon, Saturday night is probably going to be the time where I've got a bit of time. And hopefully we'll keep growing. And I look forward to seeing you next time.